having someone there who can help teach, who can help bring relevance to topics, I think makes a big difference. And it's just one really simple thing, but I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, these are key elements to any good learning program.
How many things do we actually get right the first time? And if we're getting it right every single time, are we really stretching ourselves enough? Are we really learning enough along the way?
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about building cultures of learning inside companies. And joining me this week is Liz Moran. She's had a interestingly cross-industry career where she was at Global Head of Talent at AstraZeneca. Before that, she was the Director of Global Employee Engagement at the Estee Lauder companies. She's worked at Urban Outfitters as well. So lots of diverse experience. And you'll hear Liz bring that to the conversation today. We talk a lot about how much ambiguity there is in the environment. And obviously, AI is playing a big role in this and what the implications are of that for leaders, especially how there is a risk that leaders have to take as they figure things out as they go, and how important curiosity is to lean into that risk and help people become more comfortable to take on risk. And really, where this shows up is in a culture of testing and learning. So we talk a lot about continuous improvement, and Liz shares some amazing practical tips that you can apply in your workplace, specifically around how to create a safety net to allow people to learn, how to help people take smaller risks to build up to bigger risks, how to help leaders say that it's okay to fail, so that that message trickles down, and how, from a bottom up, how important it is to develop judgment. And we actually break down a little masterclass in how to do that. We also talk about succession planning quite a bit, and you're going to learn Liz's perspective on what ready enough means when we think about emerging talent and what to do with that. And finally, there's an interesting part of our conversation where we touch on the tricky topic of high potential talent, and especially in the context of companies laying off talent, and how it's important not to pass judgment on what is good and bad, and rather look at the context of the company to understand what they need to do to be successful. So lots to unpack in this episode. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from Liz. I really enjoyed talking to her. So with that, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Liz Moran. Liz, welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And I'm excited to pick up on our private conversations. We've had one on a panel before, and today we're going to really get to go deep one-on-one together into a lot of different topics. But I want to start with something you said to me, I think, when we first met. And you said you identified as a builder, as a creator. I want to first go way back to when you were a little girl, some point in that early childhood, to ask you about a memory of one of the first things that you built or created that really sort of showed you what was possible.
Wow, that's such a good question. So if I go back to when I was a little girl, something that, so let's see. So I lived in the suburbs, and I have a couple of siblings, and we sort of were able to go, back in the 80s, you just go and you play all day. And so you do these things. One of the things that I can think of that I did was I went into the garage one day, and my dad had in there some wood. He had his tools in there, some paint cans. And I was bored one afternoon in the summertime. And I was like, I am going to make something with all of this stuff that doesn't belong to me and I probably shouldn't be touching, but like here I am, and so I'm going to do it. So I took some wood, I got the hammer and the nails, and I built. I didn't go in with an idea of what it was that I was going to create, but I just started to like hammer things and put the wood together and then paint it. And I made this little table, which like I think it probably fell over like later on that day. But like I was really proud of it because I just started to use my hands and put some things together. And as an outcome, I had this table that I then painted, and I felt really proud of it. And what it made me, so if I go back to your question, like the art of the possible, like just going in with nothing in mind and letting your hands and your mind do some creative thinking and working together. It really didn't matter to me what it was that I created. It was just that I did something and I spent an afternoon doing something that made me feel like, oh, I'm satisfied with that. That was really good.
Yeah, that's a cool story. And I find like straight away my mind went to the parallels with, I think, a lot of topics we're going to talk about now, because I love what you said about you went into it without like with this sort of blank canvas. Like you didn't have a clear idea of what, there was no like need, there was no like well-defined objective or outcome, but it was that process of almost trial and error that resulted in you creating something that you were proud of and that was somewhat functional, at least for that day. Yeah, like does that make you think of anything now as we think about the world of work and talent development and like just how important that skill set is for everyone?
Gosh, I mean, that's an interesting parallel, but I think there's something there for sure. So if you go in, if I think about that as in terms of how I've sort of crafted my career, I always gravitate towards the roles where you can build and create, where there's a transformation that's required and there's a lot of ambiguity, and you sort of have to go in, scan the environment, and start from start. And start looks different at each organization, right? Because you don't know where you have to catch up, you have to see what you're working with, and then you sort of figure it out as you go. And it's that process of figuring things out as you go that I think for me is really exciting. There's a lot of risk associated with it too, because in many instances, there's not a playbook or a blueprint that's already there for you to leverage. But if you trust yourself and you go in and you're curious, I think some cool things can happen.
I love it. So, okay, so you're like unpacking a train of thought that I've been having this week and been talking to a few people about. So we're going to get into that. And I love, you mentioned curiosity. We have a question later because I know you talked about that on another panel before. But there's a few other points you mentioned, the ambiguity in the environment, right? I think that is so true for everything right now, right? Every company I know that we work with, and I mean, even our own company, we're all trying to figure out like what are we going to do with AI? It's clearly right this big thing, and it's not going away. It is. I think we've all only just scratched the surface of it. So there's ambiguity in the environment. Like yes, right? It's everywhere. And then you mentioned risk, which I was having a conversation yesterday with someone who we were talking about this. Like to me, that's one of the defining skills that a leader is going to need in the age of AI. Because if you think of, like AI is really good at productivity work, at execution, at tasks, right? And so now, like the people now that are just really good at that type of work are going to become redundant, right? Like those are the people, in my opinion, that should be worried about, the AI replacing them. If all you're good at is executing tasks, because AI is going to be able to do that a lot better than you. And what you need to learn if you want to make yourself valuable is the ability to take on risk, because a human needs to direct the AI, right? It needs to tell the AI what to do. It needs to look at that output and refine it. And that's a task of directing, managing. It almost feels like the future is like all leaders and then AI, like I'm curious if you have a take on that.
I think leaders, or if you like, if I nuance that a little bit, it's the human skills that AI just doesn't have, or that need to be minded in partnership with AI, that I think will be increasingly important. And so the work that can be transactional, that AI can do for people, for sure. Let the tool do that, because there are things that humans can do that AI cannot consistently and effectively. And so if you use the topic of leadership, right, that's one way to categorize it. It's the human skills, I think, that need to manifest